today to talk to you about Lego-based occupational therapy for autism. So who are Seirrah OT? We are an independent occupational therapy service. We predominantly work with the ages of 0 to 25, and we have a clinic in Cardiff, and we cover the whole of the UK as well. We've recently expanded out to Shropshire. We have a lot of clients in Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham. So we're a rapidly expanding business. We only started in August 2016, and I co-founded the business along with my husband, Mark Harries. So a bit about me. I'm an occupational therapist specialising in paediatrics and autism. I also specialise in behavioural interventions, and I've worked both in the NHS and in the private sector. So in the NHS, I've helped to clear waiting lists through doing assessments and therapy and interventions. And I've also worked in the private service, setting up therapy companies and a school in London specialising in autism. So that was a primary school and a secondary school. And it was to set up their OT service, provide assessment, provide therapy, and anything that was on an individual statement. I've also worked with adults with behavioural difficulties and autism, and I've helped to support them accessing the community, accessing activities, and also doing some travel training and other life skills training. At the moment, I currently consult across the whole of the UK, and I provide assessments and therapy. I am trained in Lego-based therapy, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment and what that is. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the work of a few individuals. The first is Dr. Dan McGough, who developed Lego-based therapy, and Dr. Gina Gomez, who brought Lego therapy to the UK for the first time, and herself along with her colleagues at the Autism Research Centre at the University of Cambridge developed more research and Lego-based therapy interventions. And I received my training from Dr. Gina Gomez. So the aims of the seminar today, I'm going to highlight some of the challenges faced with autism, specifically in relation to occupational therapy. So I'm only going to touch on a couple of things, the things that I think are most relevant for today's talk. I'm also going to briefly explain about what Lego therapy is and the basic principles of it and setup. I'm going to introduce occupational therapy for those that may not know what that is, and I'm going to talk about some of the skill areas that we pull from occupational therapy to coincide with Lego-based therapy. And then I will highlight our intervention model for occupational therapy-based Lego. And finally, I will finish off by discussing the importance of assessment, intervention, and goal planning. So within autism, these are just some of the things that individuals may find challenging. So you've got communication difficulties, whether that be communicating with others through language, through body language, through facial expressions. It could be their delayed motor skill development, so fine motor skills, gross motor skills. Often individuals with autism have difficulties with motor planning, and OT specialised in the area of motor planning can help with that. Also sensory needs. Individuals often find many challenges with sensory needs, both in their home environment, their everyday, but sometimes it could be in the community or at school, college, work. And also children with autism have little intrinsic motivation for social interaction. So Lego-based therapy is really good for that because it's a social skills intervention, so it really looks at that element of difficulty. Okay, so what is Lego-based therapy? It's a social skills intervention, and within the Lego-based therapy you have clearly defined roles within a group, and the therapy is very, very structured and systematic. Within the therapy interventions, there will be group rules to establish the correct behavioural conduct for the group therapy sessions. So individuals know what's expected of them, know what to do. And also there's a shared interest in Lego. A lot of children love Lego. So they have that immediate shared interest. They can discuss what models they make at home, what they like to do. I have one child that particularly likes playing with both pink and purple Lego, and that's it. She doesn't like anything else. So her discussing her interest with other children. And engagement with peers helps to build friendships, which is really important. So the basic principles of Lego-based therapy. So the setup involves 3 roles. You should have a group of 3 children. One takes on the role of engineer. So their job is to look at the instructions of a model and build the main aim is to build that model. So the engineer will read through the instructions and will explain to the supplier the type of Lego brick they need. So they need to be able to describe that piece of Lego. They then give that instruction to the supplier, and the supplier will provide that brick to the builder. The second part of the engineer's role is to provide the building instructions for the builder, so they know what to do. So instead of all of the children looking at that booklet with the instructions, what the engineer does is use language and what they're learning through social skills to communicate what should happen throughout that Lego building process. So there's a lot of language and describing, there's a lot of skills needed to be able to access these groups. So the supplier is purely finding the brick, so they listen to that engineer. The engineer would describe it's a small blue brick, it's got 6 studs on top, it's 2 by 3, it's small, and then they have to find that maybe that it's transparent, or it's got funny curves or edges. So sometimes knowing the language that's associated with describing that block is really important. And then the supplier has to hand that over to the builder. The other thing that a supplier can do is organise those bricks. So whilst they're waiting, whilst the engineer is supplying the builder with the instructions, they can then separate the blocks that look similar to help their role in supplying those bricks. And then the builder, so they construct the model. They listen to the engineer, they listen to the instructions. If they're not sure of how to position that Lego brick, they will ask for clarification, or they'll say, is it like this, or do you mean like this? So it's really getting children and individuals to talk to each other and interact with how that should be. Now, a lot of children and individuals accessing Lego-based therapy have built many Lego models before. And it's not just about coming along to a group and building that Lego model, it's about that interaction and having those skills. So what is occupational therapy? It's a science profession which is driven by evidence-based practice. And the main aim is to help individuals engage in meaningful occupations. So I'll explain what occupations are in a moment. But the main thing is that if a child or individual is unable to access something because they have a skill deficit, then we will help them to develop that skill so they can access that meaningful occupation. So a lot of children want to access these Lego therapy groups, love Lego, but they may have poor fine motor skills. So then we would support them with that. And that's how OTs become involved in the Lego therapy. So here is the person, environment, occupation model, which is used within occupational therapy. It's one of the models, but I think it's the most appropriate for Lego-based therapy. It looks at the person. So the person is who they are, their role, are they a brother, are they a sister, are they a mum, a dad? So really looking at the role they play in their life and who they are. Could be that they're a friend as well. So we would look at that person and who they are, and what motivates them, what their interests are, what their personality is like. So it's really important for anyone working with individuals to know a bit more about that person and their background. Then we look at the environment. So this is the different environments they're in. So this could be a home, at school, at college, and we look at accessing those environments and what challenges that environment may throw up. So some individuals, when they're at home, are completely different to when they're at school. So we would be taking into account each of those environments. And then occupations. So this is quite literally what we do every single day from when we wake up to when we go to bed. So this is things like getting dressed, sleeping, washing. It could be doing academic activities like handwriting. It could be eating and using cutlery. It could be as simple as play skills and social communication and interaction. So the OT skill areas, we cover many different areas. We look at self-help skills, we look at independent living skills, we look at gross motor movements, and that's how your body moves, the whole body. So that could be things like running, walking. It could be as simple as sitting. We also look at all scales, which falls within gross motor skills, and we look at fine motor skills. Fine motor skills, what we do with our hands and our fingers that allow us to do things like handwriting. So they're just some of the areas that we look at, and we look at sensory needs as well. So today I'm just going to focus on two main areas that I think are really relevant to Lego-based therapy groups. And the first one's sensory. So we look at communication, we look at attention, arousal levels, so how a person's able to emotionally regulate themselves to be able to engage, and whether that's affected by a different environment that they go in. So we would be looking at their sensory needs to be able to engage in an environment where a Lego-based therapy session happens. We would be looking at the over and under responsivity as well. So is a child particularly under responsive to touch, that they're not able to register feeling? Or is it that they particularly like to seek out visual activities? So we consider all of those areas when we're looking at the intervention. And then you've got physical and motor skills. So we would be looking at posture control for sitting at the table. Within a Lego-based therapy group, it can run anything from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And that's a long time for some children to sit still at a table and use all their other skills to engage in that activity. So being able to sit at a table for a short period of time, we may be focusing on that. So postural stability is really important, as well as motor planning. So being able to come up with an idea. So if we were doing freestyle building, for example, and we weren't following a model, can they come up with that idea and that concept of what they'd like to build? So we work on that. And then can they plan what they're going to do and their motor movements? And can they execute those motor movements? We also look at evaluating within that process. So once they've carried something out, can they self-evaluate how that went? And can they adjust it to make it better next time? So those things are very difficult, and one area that we focus on within our groups. We look at fine motor skills. Lego is very, very small, and some children can't manipulate small items and pull them apart. I find it difficult to separate some of the Lego pieces sometimes, so other children with fine motor skills difficulties are going to find that really challenging. So we may look at using things like Duplo blocks or Mega blocks just to make it a bit more easier and accessible for them. And then we look at visual skills. So can they follow a 2D model to build a 3D model? Can they discriminate the colour? Can they describe the colour? So there are four main stages within the Seirrah OT model of intervention for Lego-based OT. You've got stage one. This is individual therapy, which is pre-skill targeting. So this is working with an individual one-to-one on the skills that they need to develop to be able to access these Lego-based therapy groups. So when I talked about the engineer, the supplier and the builder, some children aren't ready for that environment and that group. And they need to build up the pre-skills, whether it be being able to sit at a table, whether it be being able to manage their sensory needs, or being able to develop their physical skills, their fine motor skills. So within this stage, this is all about building those skills that they are missing to access those groups. So we might be looking at things like not necessarily building with Lego or Duplo or Mega blocks. We might be looking as simple as following an instruction to put Mr. Potato Head together. So putting the eyes on, putting the ears on. And it may be stripping it back and breaking it down even further than that. That it's just trying different eyes because the child really likes playing with Mr. Potato Head. So it's really looking at, well, what skills can we do and work on with this Mr. Potato Head because this is the favourite toy. It could be looking at Marble Run for a child who really loves that auditory feedback, that visual feedback, and they love things where it's moving and they can see it and they can hear it. Marble Run is great for that. So it could just be building it, it could be then following instructions that you've developed for that, and then putting the marbles on and seeing the effect afterwards. So this is more of a play-based approach where you are interacting through therapy, but in the back of your mind you're still working on those key areas that you need to access Lego therapy. Then you've got stage two. So this again is still individual therapy, but involves adult interaction. So this is the stage where we start to work on spending more time on a specific task. So it's increasing that time engaging. It's working on sharing and turn-taking skills as well. And within that adult interaction, it may be just being able to describe something. So this this particular piece is blue and it has a thing on top that feels a bit funny, and it's then teaching the appropriate language to use that. Well, how can we describe that? What could we say that looks like? What are the different words we could use to describe that? So it's really getting all those skills that you need and breaking it down into very, very small components. But at the same time, you're starting to build in that working with another person. And then stage 3 is group therapy. So this is bringing in another child. Now, I'd always advise bringing in another child who doesn't have any additional needs, because they can act as a mentor. And this stage is really to start that collaborative play, and again, that sharing and turn-taking, but not with an adult, with another child. And starting to use the skills they've learned in the individual therapy to transfer over to the group therapy, and maybe using some of the correct terminology that they need. So they're getting that practice a bit more. Again, it doesn't have to be with Lego. It can be with Duplo, it can be with Meccano, it can be anything that the child is really, really interested in. It could just be that marble run. And then stage 4 is accessing the Lego-based therapy. So in schools, they may have a Lego-based therapy group running and the child really wants to access it but doesn't have these skills. Or working through the stages, they're developing these skills. And by stage 4, they should be ready to access that group. So it's really working towards it step by step, with the ultimate aim is to engage in that Lego-based therapy group. So lastly, I'm going to talk about assessment and intervention planning. So assessment is really, really important, because we can't work through the stages or know which stage to go in at if we don't know what the skills are or what they're finding difficult. So the assessment can be through standardised assessment, it could be through observation, it could be through play. A lot of the time we have to observe in different environments to see, well, you know, this is great, we're in a clinic situation, the child's able to engage and sit for quite a long time, but actually, when we go and observe them in school, because of their additional sensory needs, they can't sit and engage. So we have to observe in different environments as well. And then I think one of the main things to note is that we always look at a child holistically, or an individual holistically. And we'll look at their physical ability, their cognitive ability, and we'll also look at sensory processing. So although we're doing an assessment and the teacher or parent might say, well, actually, it's fine motor skills they struggle with, we still look at that holistic approach. And whilst doing this assessment, we're also taking note of things like attention span and transitions and play skills, personal space, aggression. All these things are vital. We really need to know this before we introduce someone to a Lego-based therapy group, to make sure they're getting the most of that group when they access it. So intervention planning. So once the OT has gathered the information, we'll develop an individualised programme on the things that they need to work on. There's no one set programme for any child, and through any of our OT interventions that we do, I'm a strong believer in that. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I think you really need to get to know that person and know their challenges, know what's important to them and their family, and work with them and what they need. And you might try something, it doesn't work. Fine, try something else. We do it until we know what is working for that individual, and we support them that way. And it's really important to set SMART goals. So this is something that's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it's time framed. And this will really help us to evaluate if our intervention is working. So we're constantly monitoring through these goals. So what does Seirrah Occupational Therapy offer in terms of Lego-based therapy? So we do a bespoke individualised treatment session. We do one-to-one therapy. We'll adapt any content to the individual's needs. And that can change week to week. Not one week's the same in therapy. And we always take that task and break it down so it's achievable and it's also accessible. So it's pointless putting in a task that is just unrealistic and they're unable to do it. We need to make sure that they can do it. So sometimes it is just breaking it down into very, very, very small components. So if I take you back to that Miss Potato Head example, it could be as simple as just changing the eyes initially. And then we work in cohesion with other professionals. So speech and language therapists are vital for communication. And it could be that we are working in collaboration with a speech and language therapist to look at that individual's communication system. You know, it could be to find tips on how to work with them, because they're they're pre-verbal and they're unable to communicate. So we look at adapting the session with an individual who can't verbally communicate, and how can we still work on these skills and introduce them to a Lego therapy session, even the group session, but so that we're making it accessible to everybody the best way we can. And we work on functional skills. That's the priority of everything that we do. And we offer consultancy to schools. So if a school's looking at setting up a Lego-based therapy group, then we will work with them to set it up. We will provide them with ideas, and we will also do coaching with them as well. We will facilitate Lego therapy groups ourselves in our clinic in Cardiff, and we offer training for professionals. So recently we invited Dr. Gina Gomez down to Cardiff to run some professional training. So sometimes we get professionals outside in to do the training, but we also run in-house training. And one of the things Dr. Gina Gomez mentioned to me is that she doesn't do parent training. And we've had a lot of requests for parent training. So we're now starting to develop workshops where parents can come along, learn what Lego therapy is, learn, well, you know, my child wants to access that, but actually they've been told they can't. Why not? They can learn a bit more about it, and also take away some of those strategies that they can then practice at home so their child can then access it. So it's not always accessing therapy with an OT, it's things that you can do at home. So we do provide that training and workshop as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening to my talk today. And if you have any questions, we're downstairs on stand 20. So you can either pop over and speak to myself or one of my colleagues. And all their pictures are there on the board so you know who you're looking at. So we've got Mark as the business manager. He doesn't know an awful lot about Lego therapy, but he does have some knowledge, so you could speak to him if no one else is around. And then you have myself, Kaylee and Kath are all trained in Lego therapy. So if you have any questions, please come and speak to us. Thank you.